From the time of its conception, Fire Emblem has been a game that has challenged players of all ages. Its difficult number-based chess-like gameplay was brutal and unforgiving. Add to this the advent of permanent death, and you have what can be a frustrating yet rewarding experience. Over time, Fire Emblem has, as it should, started to make the franchise more available to less experienced players. First, they added different difficulty levels like easy, normal, and hard. Then they introduced an even greater range of difficulties, as well as a new way of playing that turned off the permanent death that the series had been known for. Finally, the most recent titles have added ways to rewind time in battles. Some would argue that all of these difficulty changes are great for the series. It has allowed so many new players to try Fire Emblem that would have otherwise been too nervous to start. On the other hand, players have said that all these inclusions have changed Fire Emblem for the worse. Regardless of what side of the fence you sit on, one thing is for sure, the series will never be the same. If we take a look at the first game in the series, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, we see the skeletal structure of the games we know and love today. It's grid-based, has a cast of colorful characters, has all the numbers, and an epic story. This was Fire Emblem in its purest form, and for over 2 decades, this is what Fire Emblem was. Of course, the graphics improved, new characters, places, classes, and weapons, and new difficulties were added, but Fire Emblem was Fire Emblem. It wasn't until the 12th entry in the franchise that we got casual mode, and this flipped the series on its head. In an interview, the writer and director of the first 5 Fire Emblem games, Shozu Kaga, stated the following. It's not a big problem if some of your characters die in Fire Emblem. I want each player to create their own unique story. Don't get caught up in trying to get a perfect ending. Have fun. To Kaga, Fire Emblem wasn't just a strategy game. It was an experience, something that would be different for every player. Some characters may fall in battle and others will become war heroes, but it's up to the player to make their own story. In another interview, Kaga had this to say about permanent death. I wanted to make a strategy game that was more dramatic, something where you would really be able to feel the pain and struggle of the characters. That's why characters can't be revived once they're killed, to impart a sense of gravity and seriousness. In turn, I think the result is that the more love you have for your characters, the more rewarding the game is. The brutal difficulty and permanent death of characters in Fire Emblem aren't there just to make the game more challenging. However, it is to make the player feel something. You should care about every soldier in your army. Their death should drive you to become better at the game to keep your other units alive. Now, this same philosophy was carried on throughout most of the series, and it could be seen in not only the story and character interactions, but also in the gameplay itself. Have you ever wondered why Fire Emblem gives you characters later in the game that are inferior to the characters you have been training up to that point? For example, in Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, you get Deke early on. He is a strong mercenary, and he can serve your party well for the entire game. Then, just 6 chapters later, another mercenary, Ogier, joins the party. His base stats are inferior to Deke's in every way, and he just seems like dead weight. But consider for a moment that many players may have lost Deke in the early game. Maybe he took an unexpected critical hit and died forever. The developers were nice enough to give you a replacement. He isn't as good as Deke, so the pain of losing him is still felt, but Ogier is still serviceable. There are examples of this all across the first 12 entries in the series. The first time we see the series head in a different direction is Fire Emblem Awakening. In Awakening, the majority of the characters join before the halfway point of the game. There are very few units that join late to fill in a party that has lost units. The way Awakening works around this is with the child units. There are 12 characters that can be recruited anytime after Chapter 13, as long as the requisite support levels have been met. The next game in the series, Fire Emblem Fates, handled units in the same way as Awakening, then Echoes was a little more traditional because it was a remake of an older game. Though it did introduce Milla's Turnwheel, which is the predecessor to Divine Pulse, and now that leaves us with 3 houses. Fire Emblem Three Houses has a total of 33 playable characters. all of which, save one, can be recruited before the time skip. There are no replacement units to play with, no one to recruit for the second half of the game. What you have early on is what you get. So to compensate for this, rather than having new units to receive later, the game gives the player Divine Pulse, allowing mistakes to be undone. If you throw your favorite unit into an unsafe space, it's all fine and dandy. Just use Divine Pulse, the risk of losing a unit is gone. Now, I can hear some of you saying, but FED, don't people just reset in the older games anyways? And that is totally true, but there is a different feeling behind it. The despair that is felt when your favorite unit dies is lessened by Divine Pulse. Before you could rewind time, it became a matter of, do I let this unit I want to have die? Or do I reset and do all of that work again? And personally, there is a greater sense of reward when keeping everyone alive. Divine Pulse or whatever else didn't allow my units to survive, I did. Will Fire Emblem ever return to its core ideals, those same ideas and philosophies that its creator intended? Or are we in a new age of Fire Emblem, where the focus has fallen away from building relationships with characters through gameplay? Are supports the only way this will ever happen in future games? Now, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I'm sure some of you are willing to take a crack at it. So leave your thoughts in the comments on this topic. And as always, like and subscribe for more Fire Emblem discussion. Oh, and don't forget to check out the Fire Emblem Discussion Patreon. Any amount of support you can give the channel goes a long way and it is much appreciated. Thanks for watching, friends.